This story is titled, I Came Home Early and Heard My Girlfriend Brag About Cheating on Me. I walked out without saying a word. Now she's desperate to find me. Hi everyone. Before we dive in, a quick favor. If you enjoy content like this, please hit the subscribe button. It's free, supports the channel, and make sure you never miss out on amazing videos. Alright, let's get started. Hey Reddit. So, this has been a crazy few weeks, and I honestly don't know what to do with myself. Thought I'd share the story because maybe putting it out there will help me process. I'm Drew, 32, and I thought I had my life figured out, or at least the relationship part of it. I've been dating this girl, Olivia, for 2 years. We met at a Christmas party a couple of years back, and at the time, it felt like one of those, this is meant to happen moments. Looking back now, I guess I was just dumb. Anyway, let me start at the beginning. The party where we met was thrown by a mutual friend of ours, Jason. Jason and I go way back, like high school days, and Olivia was one of his employees. I didn't even want to go to the party that night. Work had been brutal, and I just wanted to stay home. But Jason guilt-tripped me into showing up, saying I needed to meet people and live a little. So I went, and there she was. Olivia. She was laughing with a group of people when I first saw her. Jason, being Jason, dragged me over to introduce us. We hit it off almost immediately. She laughed at my dumb jokes, asked about my interests, and genuinely seemed interested in me. I remember leaving that party with her number and this goofy smile on my face. Fast forward a few weeks, we went on our first date. Nothing fancy, just a burger joint and a walk in the park. But it was perfect. She was funny, smart, and way more grounded than I expected someone like her to be. We clicked, you know? Like I could see this going somewhere serious. And it did. A few months later, we were officially a couple, and everything felt good. But there was one thing that always stuck out. Her younger sister, Chloe. From the very first time I met her, I could tell she didn't like me. She wasn't outright rude, but she had this way of making comments that felt like little jabs. Like during one of the first family dinners I went to, she said, "Wow, Olivia, you really went for the low-maintenance look, huh?" Like, what does that even mean? I brushed it off at first, thinking maybe she was just protective of her sister or trying to mess with me. But it didn't stop. Chloe would always find ways to undermine me. If I mentioned something I was passionate about, she'd roll her eyes or make a sarcastic comment. Like, one time I was talking about a hike, Olivia, and I went on, and Chloe was like, "Wow, how thrilling. I'm sure you guys had a wild time looking at trees." She'd also do this thing where she'd bring up Olivia's exes, like, "Oh, remember when you and Mark went to Cancun? That sounded like such a fun trip." It felt like she was constantly trying to remind me that Olivia could do better or that I didn't measure up. I brought it up to Olivia a few times, asking why Chloe seemed to have it out for me. She'd just laugh it off and say, "That's just Chloe. She's like that with everyone." But it didn't feel like that. I mean, she was perfectly nice to everyone else, just not me. I started dreading any time we had to hang out with her, but for Olivia's sake, I sucked it up. Despite Chloe's attitude, my relationship with Olivia kept moving forward. We moved in together after about a year, splitting rent in a small house just outside of the city. Life felt stable, like we were building something real. I wasn't one of those guys who needed to rush into marriage or anything, but after 2 years, I started thinking about proposing. Olivia was my person, or at least I thought she was. This year, Jason was hosting another Christmas party, and it felt like the perfect opportunity to pop the question. It was where we met, and Jason had always been a big part of our story. I talked to Olivia's parents about it a few weeks ago, asking for their blessing, and they were over the moon. I spent weeks planning it. I picked out the ring, rehearsed what I was going to say, and even coordinated with Jason to make sure the moment would be perfect. I imagined Olivia's face when I got down on one knee in front of all our friends, how happy she'd be, how we'd laugh about the journey that got us there. I was so sure I was doing the right thing. But life has a way of kicking you in the teeth when you least expect it. All those plans, all that excitement. It was like building a house on quicksand. I didn't know it at the time, but the foundation of our relationship wasn't what I thought it was, and the cracks were about to show in the worst way. About a month ago, the guys and I planned a weekend fishing trip up to this spot we love near the lake. It's quiet, kind of off the grid, and it's always been our go-to place to just unwind and catch up. We pack up a couple of coolers, grab some gear, and just hang out. I'd been looking forward to it for weeks. Life had been a grind, and I needed the break. Olivia wasn't thrilled about me being gone for a whole weekend, but I told her it was important to me, and she seemed to get it. Or at least, she pretended to. So, I was driving out that Saturday morning. I had my truck loaded up. Tent, cooler, food, everything I thought I'd need. I was already an hour out when it hit me. I'd left my tackle box sitting in the garage. Now, I know it doesn't sound like a big deal, But that tackle box was brand new. Olivia had given it to me as a gift, and I'd spent a fortune on new lures, hooks, the works. I couldn't just fish without it. Plus, I knew the guys would give me endless crap if I showed up empty-handed, so I sighed, turned the truck around, and started heading back home. I wasn't too happy about losing time, but I figured I'd grab the box and get back on the road in no time. Olivia had mentioned she'd be out shopping with Chloe that day, so I wasn't expecting anyone to be home. Honestly, I was kind of relieved about that. I didn't want to deal with the whole, "why are you back so soon" conversation. Olivia wasn't the type to hold back her opinions, and if she thought something was dumb, she'd let you know. I figured it was better to just be in and out without any awkwardness. By the time I pulled into the driveway, it was around 3 p.m. Olivia's car was parked there, which caught me off guard. My first thought was that maybe she'd gotten back early, or their shopping trip had been cut short. I didn't think much of it. Sometimes plans change, right? I parked the truck and headed inside, already focused on grabbing the tackle box and hitting the road again. When I walked through the door, the house felt oddly still. You know when something just feels off? The air felt heavier, like the kind of quiet that isn't really quiet. I could hear faint voices coming from the living room, so I figured Olivia and Chloe were just hanging out. It wasn't unusual for Chloe to be over. She didn't live too far, and Olivia liked having her around. I usually just kept my distance when Chloe was over. It was easier that way. As I made my way through the house, I realized their voices were louder than I thought. They weren't just chatting, they were laughing. Not the friendly, light-hearted kind of laughing either. It was that mean, gossipy kind of laugh. I stopped in my tracks, halfway down the hall. I didn't mean to eavesdrop, but the way they were talking, something about it made me freeze. I couldn't help but listen. Chloe's voice carried first. "You're seriously telling me he didn't notice? Not even a little?" She sounded almost impressed, but in that snarky, mocking way she always had. Olivia's laugh followed, softer but full of amusement. "Of course not. Drew doesn't notice anything unless it's right in front of him. He's so focused on his little hobbies, he has no idea what's going on." My chest tightened. I didn't know what they were talking about, but the way they said my name, it felt wrong, like I was the punchline of some joke I didn't understand. Chloe wasn't done. "I still don't get how you put up with him. He's like the most boring guy I've ever met. Always talking about fishing or hiking or whatever. God, Olivia, you could do so much better." "He's so safe," Olivia said. Her tone wasn't loving or affectionate. It sounded almost dismissive. "Safe?" Chloe replied. "Come on, you deserve more than boring. Scott is way better." My heart started racing. "Scott? Who's Scott?" I thought. Olivia's laugh cut through me. "I know. I didn't plan for it to happen, but Scott, he's just different. And in bed? Oh my God, it's insane. Drew doesn't even come close," Chloe continued. "Then what are you waiting for? Just break it off with Drew already. Scott is clearly the better choice." Olivia sighed. "I can't. Not yet. And I know he's planning something big for Christmas. I don't want to ruin it. Yet. I wanted to smash something. Yell. Do anything to release the anger boiling inside me. But instead, I just took a deep breath and left the house. As I closed the front door behind me, I heard Olivia call out, "Drew? Is that you?" I didn't answer. I got in my car and drove away. She called me a few minutes later, but I ignored it. By the time I got back on the road, she had sent me a string of messages. "Where are you? I thought I heard the door. Are you okay? Please call me." I didn't go back to the fishing trip. I couldn't. Instead, I drove aimlessly for hours, trying to figure out what the hell had just happened. It was like everything I thought I knew about Olivia, about our relationship, was suddenly up in the air, and I didn't know what to do with that. Eventually, I pulled into a motel parking lot and checked in for the night. It wasn't much, but it gave me a place to sit and think, without the weight of the house or Olivia's presence looming over me. I turned my phone off, ignoring the flood of messages and missed calls that had started coming in. I couldn't deal with her right now. I didn't want to hear her excuses or explanations. What could she possibly say to justify what I'd overheard? I spent the entire night at that motel, staring at the ceiling and playing the conversation I overheard in my head like some twisted highlight reel. Every laugh, every word felt like a dagger. The way Olivia talked about me with Chloe wasn't just disrespectful, it was cruel. And the mention of Scott? That hit differently. Knowing there was a name, a face to attach to her betrayal, made it even worse. It wasn't just some abstract mistake I could brush off. She had been making choices, deliberate ones, to lie to me, laugh behind my back, and plan for her exit while I was planning our future. Looking back, though, there were signs. Subtle ones. But I chose to ignore them back then. For example, over the last few months, Olivia had been more busy than usual. Gym sessions, last-minute drinks with her coworkers, impromptu shopping trips with Chloe. At the time, I didn't think much of it. She wasn't the clingy type, and I respected her independence. But now I couldn't help wondering how many of those nights were spent with Scott instead. Was she seeing him when she was out with Chloe? Was Chloe covering for her the whole time? I couldn't shake the idea that Chloe had been part of this from the start, encouraging her, enabling her, and probably enjoying every second of it. I hadn't told anyone yet, not even my friends. I didn't know how to start that conversation. Hey guys, turns out my girlfriend of 2 years has been cheating on me with some guy from the gym. It sounded pathetic in my head, and I didn't want their pity. I wanted to deal with this on my own, at least for now. By the time I left the motel, I had a plan, or at least the beginnings of one. I wasn't going to confront Olivia yet. That would come later, on my terms. First, I needed to figure out what to do about our living situation. The lease was in my name, so legally I had all the control. I wasn't about to let her stay in the house while I figured things out. She didn't deserve that. If anything, I wanted her out of my space as soon as possible. When I got back to the house that afternoon, the first thing I noticed was that Olivia's car wasn't in the driveway. Perfect. I parked my truck and walked in. I headed straight to the spare room where we kept the trash bags. If I was going to do this, I needed to do it now. I grabbed a couple of them and started putting her things. Clothes, shoes, makeup, anything that was obviously hers went straight into the trash bag. I just wanted her stuff out of my house. The faster, the better. I dragged everything out to the front porch and left it there. Then I went inside, pulled up the contact info for the locksmith I'd used a year ago, and called him to come change the locks. He showed up within the hour, and I didn't give him any details, just told him I needed the work done ASAP. Once the locks were changed, I felt a small sense of relief. It wasn't much, but it was a step in taking back control. Before I left the house, I grabbed a piece of paper and wrote a quick note. Nothing dramatic, just a simple, "You know what you did. Don't contact me." I taped it to the door and locked up, feeling the weight of the keys in my hand like they were the last tie to the life I'd just thrown away. With everything packed and the locks changed, I needed some space. So I decided to head out to a retreat center I'd heard about a while back. It was 5 hours away. I needed this kind of long drives, and it offered a quiet place to think. No phone, no distractions, just me and my thoughts. That's exactly what I needed. On my way out of town, I stopped to grab a coffee and sat in the parking lot for a few minutes, scrolling through my phone. Sure enough, there were dozens of missed calls and texts from Olivia. At first, they were casual. "Hey, where are you?" And "Did you come home last night?" But as the hours went on, they became more frantic. "Drew, I'm really worried. Please call me. What's going on? Why aren't you answering?" And finally, "Where the hell are you? We need to talk." I didn't respond to any of them. I wasn't ready to talk to her yet. What was I supposed to say? "Oh, hey, I overheard you talking about Scott and how I don't measure up. Want to explain?" Number. That wasn't how I wanted to handle this. She didn't deserve an explanation from me, not after what she'd done. As I drove toward the retreat, I started thinking about what would happen when she came home and found her stuff on the porch. I pictured her reaction. Probably shock, maybe some tears. Part of me hoped she'd feel embarrassed, like she'd finally realize how badly she'd messed up. But another part of me didn't care how she felt. This wasn't about her anymore. It was about me, and what I needed to do to move forward. By the time I got to the retreat, I was emotionally drained. I spent the next 2 days at the retreat. Honestly, I didn't even think much about what I was going to do next. I just knew I wasn't rushing back into the mess I left behind. Let her sit there and figure out why her stuff was on the porch. When I finally headed back into town, I was clear about one thing. Olivia wasn't going to manipulate her way out of this. I wasn't going to give her a chance to spin her lies or cry her way back into my good graces. If anything, I felt a kind of cold clarity driving back. She wasn't worth the energy. Whatever fake version of herself she'd been presenting for 2 years was done, and I wasn't playing along anymore. As I pulled into my driveway, it was obvious she'd been there. Her stuff, which I'd left packed on the porch, was gone. She'd taken it all. The note I'd taped to the door was missing too. But that didn't surprise me. What did catch my attention was the stack of envelopes wedged into the screen door. Letters, all addressed to me, all from Olivia. I didn't even touch them. I just shook my head, unlocked the new lock, and went inside. After clearing her last traces from the house, I sat down on the couch and pulled out my phone. I hadn't checked it since before the retreat, and when I turned it on, the notifications started flooding in. Texts, missed calls, voicemails. It was a barrage of desperation. The texts started out calm. "Hey, I came home and saw my stuff. Can we talk? I don't know what's going on, but I'm worried." Then they got more frantic. "Drew, what the hell? Why is all my stuff outside? Please call me. I'm so sorry for whatever I did. And finally, they turned angry. This is childish, Drew. You're acting like a jerk. At least give me the decency of a conversation. I smirked reading that one. Decency? After what I overheard? The irony wasn't lost on me. I didn't bother responding. Instead, I blocked her number. Done. Simple as that. She didn't deserve an explanation, and I wasn't about to waste my time crafting some long text or arguing over the phone. The next morning, I got a call from Jason, the mutual friend who'd introduced me to Olivia at the Christmas party 2 years ago. Jason's one of those friends who's always got your back, but doesn't sugarcoat things. When I picked up, his tone was casual, but I could tell he knew something was up. Hey man, everything okay? Olivia's been blowing up my phone. I leaned back in my chair and sighed. Yeah, she's probably freaking out because I threw her out. Jason paused, then let out a low whistle. Damn! What happened? For the first time, I told someone the whole story. How I'd overheard Olivia and Chloe's conversation, the way they mocked me, and of course, the part about Scott. Jason didn't interrupt, which I appreciated. When I finished, he let out a long breath. Wow, that's messed up. Honestly, though, good for you. She didn't deserve you, man. Jason wasn't the type to blindly take sides, so his support meant a lot. Over the next few days, Olivia's attempts to contact me didn't stop. She tried everything, calling from other numbers, showing up at the house, I didn't answer the door, and even leaving letters in my mailbox. Each letter was the same. Apologies, excuses, and pleas for another chance. I didn't read most of them, but the few I skimmed all had the same theme. She was sorry, it wasn't what it looked like, she still loved me, blah blah blah. The same tired script cheaters always use when they're caught. I wasn't buying it. Chloe also tried reaching out, which made me laugh. Her messages were so out of touch it was almost funny. Hey, I heard Olivia's upset. Maybe you guys should talk. Like she hadn't been the one encouraging Olivia to cheat in the first place. I blocked her too. The next morning, I decided it was time to call Olivia's parents. They'd always been kind to me, treating me like family from the moment Olivia and I got serious. Her mom, Linda, would send me home with leftovers after family dinners, and her dad, Tom, loved talking about sports and grilling tips. They were the type of people who genuinely cared, and I figured they deserved to know the truth about what their daughter had been up to. Plus, I wanted them to hear it from me, not some twisted version Olivia would no doubt try to sell them. I wasn't nervous about the call, but I knew it wouldn't be easy. It's not exactly a casual conversation. Hey, just thought you should know your daughter's a cheater, and her sister's been hyping her up about it. Still, I called Linda's number, and she picked up on the second ring. Drew, how are you, sweetheart? It's been a while, she said, her voice as warm as ever. Hi, Linda, I replied, trying to keep my tone steady. Do you have a few minutes to talk? It's important. Of course, she said, sounding concerned. Is everything okay? No, I said bluntly. Not really. I explained everything. How I'd overheard Olivia and Chloe laughing about me, how she admitted to cheating with some guy named Scott, and how Chloe had been egging her on the entire time. I didn't sugarcoat it. I told her exactly what they said, word for word, because I wanted her to understand just how low both of her daughters had stooped. By the time I finished, the line was silent. For a moment, I thought Linda had hung up, but then I heard a shaky breath. Drew, she finally said, her voice trembling. I don't even know what to say. I can't believe this. Are you sure? Maybe you misunderstood. I didn't misunderstand, I interrupted firmly. Linda started crying. I felt a little bad, but at the same time, I wasn't going to soften the truth for her. Her daughters had done this, not me. After a few moments, I heard Tom's voice in the background, asking what was wrong. Tom, Linda said, her voice breaking. It's about Olivia and Chloe. There was some muffled noise as Tom took the phone. Drew, what's going on? Linda's in tears over here. So, I told him. The whole thing. Again. By the time I finished, he was silent, just like Linda had been. Then, after what felt like forever, he let out a long, heavy sigh. I'm sorry, Drew, he said, his voice low and serious. You didn't deserve that. None of it. I can't believe they'd... God, I don't even have words. It's not your fault, I said, and I meant it. But I thought you should know. I know how much you both care about your daughters, but I can't stay quiet about this. I'm done being disrespected. You're absolutely right, Tom said, his voice sharp now. They crossed a line, and they need to face the consequences. I don't care if they're my daughters. What they did is disgusting. Linda, still crying in the background, chimed in. Drew, I'm so sorry. You've always been so good to Olivia, to our family. I can't believe she would throw that away. And Chloe, how could she encourage something like this? I don't even recognize them anymore. We talked for a while longer. They asked if I was okay, how I was handling everything, and if there was anything they could do to help. I told them I was fine, better than they probably expected, and that I was moving on, no matter how hard Olivia begged. Tom promised me they'd handle things on their end, and made it clear they wouldn't tolerate that kind of behavior in their family. Before we hung up, Tom said something that stuck with me. Drew, you've always been like a son to us. What Olivia did doesn't change that. You're welcome in our lives anytime, but as far as I'm concerned, she's out. Both of them are. I can't have people like that in my life, even if they're family. I wasn't sure how Olivia's parents would react, but I didn't think they'd cut ties with both of their daughters. It was a bold move, but honestly, it made me respect them even more. They didn't try to justify or excuse Olivia's behavior. They didn't pull the blood is thicker than water card. They just saw the situation for what it was and stood by their principles. I felt relieved, like a weight had been lifted knowing Olivia and Chloe wouldn't have the support system they'd probably been counting on. But another part of me felt sad, not for them, but for Linda and Tom. They didn't deserve this. They'd raised two daughters who turned out to be selfish, deceitful people, and now they had to live with that reality. I wouldn't wish that on anyone. By the time I went to bed that night, I felt more at peace than I had in weeks. Olivia and Chloe might have tried to ruin my life, but I wasn't the one left scrambling to fix things. That was on them now. And judging by Tom and Linda's reaction, they were going to have a rough time ahead. In the days that followed my conversation with Olivia's parents, the fallout from her and Chloe's actions started to spread. Tom and Linda weren't the kind of people to make empty promises, and when they said they were cutting ties with both of their daughters, they meant it. I didn't expect the extent to which they'd follow through, though. It was satisfying to watch. The first thing I heard was that Olivia had been fired. Jason called me. Well, she's not my employee anymore. I can't keep someone like that around. It's bad for the team, bad for morale, and honestly, I don't want someone who thinks that kind of behavior is okay representing my company. I wasn't expecting him to fire her, but I couldn't pretend I was upset about it. Olivia had always bragged about how much Jason respected her work, how secure her position was. Clearly, her actions had consequences she didn't see coming. You didn't have to do that on my account, I said, though part of me was relieved to know she wasn't going to skate by without any repercussions. Jason scoffed. This isn't just about you, Drew. I don't tolerate that kind of behavior, period. She crossed a line, and I'm not going to let her bring her drama into my workplace. After we hung up, I couldn't help but feel a sense of vindication. Olivia had been so smug, so confident that she could get away with everything. But now, the life she'd built was starting to crumble. From what I heard through mutual friends, and a little from Jason, Olivia tried to play the victim at first. She told anyone who would listen that I'd overreacted and kicked her out without giving her a chance to explain. But as the full story came out, thanks to Jason and her parents, people stopped buying her act. She went from being someone everyone admired to someone they pitied, and not in a good way. As for Chloe, her involvement didn't go unnoticed either. Tom and Linda were furious with her for encouraging Olivia's behavior, and they made it clear she wasn't welcome in their home anymore. Chloe had always been the family wild card, the one who could never hold down a job, constantly borrowing money, and always relying on her parents to bail her out. Tom and Linda cut all financial support to both Olivia and Chloe. They didn't have much of a safety net anymore. Tom and Linda also didn't hold back when people asked why. According to Jason, Linda had told one of her friends at church, "We raised them better than this. If they're going to behave this way, they can do it without our help." Their social circle quickly picked up on the situation, and word spread fast. Olivia and Chloe found themselves ostracized by people they'd once relied on for support. Friends stopped returning their calls, invitations to events dried up, and even their Instagram followers started dwindling. Olivia, who had always cared way too much about appearances, must have been losing her mind over it. Apparently, Chloe let Olivia crash at her place for a while, but that didn't last long. From what Jason told me, Chloe couldn't handle the constant drama Olivia brought with her. Between Olivia spiraling after losing her job and Chloe struggling to keep up with her own expenses, things fell apart quickly. One night, Jason mentioned he'd heard through the grapevine that Chloe had finally snapped and kicked Olivia out too. She told her to figure her own crap out, Jason said, almost laughing. I guess being sisters only goes so far when someone's a walking disaster. I didn't feel bad for either of them. They'd made their choices, and now they were dealing with the fallout. If anything, it felt like poetic justice. Olivia and Chloe had spent so much time tearing me down, acting like I was just some safe and boring guy who didn't deserve their respect. Now they were the ones scrambling to pick up the pieces while I was moving on with my life. One night, as I was scrolling through my phone, I got a text from Jason. It was a reminder about the upcoming Christmas party. "Hope you're still coming," he wrote. "Don't worry, Olivia's not invited. This year's all about good vibes." I stared at the message for a while, debating whether or not to respond. Part of me wanted to skip the party altogether. It felt too tied to everything that had happened. But another part of me thought, why should I let her ruin it for me? It's not her party, and she sure as hell doesn't own the memory of that night. So, yeah, I'm going to the party. Not just to see friends or enjoy the holiday spirit, but to reclaim something. My story, my dignity, my life, whatever you want to call it. If Olivia showed up and tried to stir the pot one last time, well, let's just say I'm ready for her. This time, I'm not the clueless guy standing in the hallway, blindsided by betrayal. I'm walking in with my eyes wide open. I guess we'll find out. Thanks for reading until here. I'll update you guys after the Christmas party. Update. All right, Reddit. Buckle up because things went down at the Christmas party, and I'm still trying to wrap my head around it. If you've been following my story, you know where we left off. Let me take you to the party. The night started off fine. Actually, it was better than fine. Jason knows how to throw a party, and his place looked like something out of a Christmas movie. Twinkling lights, a giant tree in the corner, and people in festive sweaters holding drinks and laughing. It felt good to be around friends, people who had my back and knew the real story about what went down with Olivia. I mingled, caught up with old friends, and even met a few new people. I felt like myself again. No baggage, no drama, just Drew. But then, of course, the drama walked in. It was about halfway through the party when the front door swung open, and there she was, Olivia, standing in the doorway, looking like she hadn't slept in days. Her makeup was smudged, her hair was a mess, and she wasn't wearing anything remotely festive, just a plain black coat and jeans. She looked completely out of place among the crowd of cheerful partygoers. The room went dead silent. Everyone turned to look at her, and you could feel the tension crackling in the air. Jason was the first to speak. "What the hell are you doing here?" he asked, his tone sharp. "I need to talk to Drew," Olivia said, her voice shaky but loud enough for everyone to hear. "Please, just for a minute." Jason stepped forward, blocking her path. "You weren't invited, Olivia. You need to leave." She ignored him, her eyes darting around the room until they landed on me. "Drew," she said, her voice breaking, "please, I just need to talk to you. Just 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking." Now here's the thing. Old me? The guy I was a month ago? He probably would have folded. He would have given her those 5 minutes because he wanted to believe the best in people, even when they didn't deserve it. But new me? The guy standing there with a room full of supportive friends and zero patience for her nonsense? Yeah, that guy wasn't about to play along. I crossed my arms and stared at her. "Talk about what, Olivia?" I said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "You've already said everything I needed to know. You just didn't think I was listening." Her face crumpled, and for a second, I thought she might actually turn around and leave. But no. She took a shaky step forward and started pleading, her voice cracking with every word. "Drew, I made a mistake. A huge mistake. I was stupid, and I didn't realize what I had until I lost it. Please, just give me a chance to explain." Jason cut in again, his voice firm. "Olivia, I'm serious. You need to go. This isn't the place for this." She spun around to face him, tears streaming down her face now. "Jason, please. I just need 5 minutes with him. Just 5 minutes and I'll leave." Jason looked like he was about to lose it, but I raised a hand to stop him. "It's fine," I said. "Let her say what she needs to say." You could hear a pin drop as I walked toward her. Everyone was watching, waiting to see what would happen. Olivia wiped at her face, trying to compose herself as I stopped a few feet away from her. "Go ahead," I said. "Say whatever it is you think will fix this." She took a deep breath, her whole body shaking. "Drew, I was an idiot. I let Chloe get in my head, and I made mistakes I can't take back. But I swear it didn't mean anything. Scott didn't mean anything. None of it did. You're the one I love, Drew. You've always been the one." I stared at her, unblinking. "You love me?" I asked, my voice calm but cutting. "Is that what you were thinking when you called me boring? When you laughed about how clueless I was? Or how about when you said Scott was insane in bed and I didn't even come close? Was that love, Olivia?" She flinched like I'd slapped her. "I didn't mean any of that," she whispered. "I was stupid, Drew. I was trying to impress Chloe and I—" "Stop," I said, cutting her off. "Don't blame Chloe for your choices. She might have encouraged you, but you're the one who made those decisions. You're the one who lied, cheated, and then laughed about it." Her tears were falling freely now, and she dropped her voice so only I could hear. "I'm begging you, Drew. I don't have anyone else. Chloe kicked me out. My parents won't talk to me. You're all I have left." I stepped back, letting her words hang in the air for a moment before I replied. "And whose fault is that, Olivia? Because it sure as hell isn't mine." At that point, Jason had had enough. He stepped forward, gesturing to one of his friends near the door. "Time to go," he said firmly. Two of Jason's friends gently but firmly escorted Olivia out, ignoring her weak protests and pleas. The door shut behind her, and just like that, the tension in the room evaporated. Someone cranked up the music, and people started talking again, but the energy had definitely shifted. Jason walked over to me, clapping a hand on my shoulder. "You good?" he asked. I nodded. "Yeah," I said, feeling strangely calm. "I'm good." And you know what? I really was. Watching Olivia crash and burn like that didn't hurt. If anything, it felt like closure. I'd spent 2 years of my life with someone who didn't deserve me, but now I was finally free. So, that's the story. I don't know what Olivia's doing now, and honestly, I don't care. She made her choices, and now she's dealing with the consequences. As for me, I'm moving forward. I've got good friends, a supportive community, and a life that's finally my own again. That's all I need.
I am 32 years old, and I have a younger brother, 28 years old, and we were raised by our dad, 56 years old. My brother has always been given preference by my parents over me ever since we were in middle school. I grew accustomed to it over time. My father never saw me as the type of kid he wanted. I wasn't into sports or the usual macho things that males do, unlike him. I was a big mama's boy growing up since I was always more into feminine stuff. I enjoyed reading, singing, and doing anything involving the kitchen. I was terrible at football when my dad attempted to force me to play with him. We gradually drifted apart. Conversely, my brother was the perfect son my father had always desired. He was a rough and tumble youngster who didn't mind being harmed or soiled when playing. He was my dad's ideal kid, and it was clear that he loved my brother far more than I did. His father constantly complimented his brother, but never me. But my mother was never partial to anyone. I loved her more because she treated me fairly. I did make an effort to spend time and become friends with my dad, but he didn't appear to be interested in mending our connection once we drifted away. Unfortunately, when I was in 8th grade, my mother, the glue that kept our dysfunctional family together, passed suddenly. It was too late to rescue her when we discovered that she had been afflicted with cancer. She was gone from us in an instant. I was heartbroken by my mother's death and went into a spiral at that time. My kitchen, where I would prepare something fresh every day as if my life depended on it, was my one haven of comfort. My mother was an amazing chef, and she frequently confided in me that she probably would have been a chef if she hadn't been pressured to take over her dad's company. Hence, my main source of solace was cooking, especially because my brother and father offered me little support in processing my emotions. When my mother passed away, they repressed whatever feeling they may have felt, and if anything, it made them even more aloof from me. Something like this would have bonded us together in a normal family. My dad became increasingly angrier at my obsession with cooking, and he would constantly nudge me to leave the kitchen and do something manly. When he finally had enough, he threatened me one day that he would make me do every other domestic task if he ever spotted me in the kitchen. We got into a heated argument after he encouraged me to man up and be more like my brother. He agreed when I told him he had never loved me. At last it was visible to everyone. I suppose it was the last time my father and I had an honest conversation since I stopped attempting to win him over completely after that. He also didn't appear to care. I stayed in my room and studied new recipes while listening to music for the following few years. I was determined to make this chef thing work, for my mother as much as for myself. In the meanwhile, I only talked to my dad when it was absolutely essential. Like our father, my brother showed little regard for me and disregarded me. I therefore had no one to really rely on once my mom went away. When it came time for me to submit college applications, I made the decision to apply to both traditional institutions and a few prestigious culinary schools. I had to try even though I wasn't sure whether my dad would approve. That summer, I had worked as a covered intern in a restaurant, gaining some experience that helped me get a letter of recommendation. I was eventually accepted into a number of colleges, one of which was the top culinary school in France. Because this meant I would have to seek my dad for permission, I was both excited and anxious. I wasn't ready for Dad to flatly refuse to pay for my education, but I was ready to plead if necessary. I recall being perplexed when Dad declared he wouldn't foot the bill for my schooling. Not that my dad was impoverished. He was actually quite wealthy and could have easily sent me to France. He didn't want my brother to feel uneasy as a result of my achievement, not because of financial gain. My dad didn't want me competing with my brother since he was having trouble focusing and getting good marks. This was so vicious that it stunned me. It seemed unbelievable to me that a father would let his beloved child's hopes be dashed in such a way. I begged and argued my way out of a big argument with my dad, said some hurtful things, and eventually moved out of the house. I moved to live with my mother's older sister, my maternal aunt. My comfort in the home where I had grown up with my mother was the only reason I hadn't moved out sooner. My aunt lived distant from my high school, so I also didn't want to move schools. I required her assistance after telling her about my dad's refusal to pay my tuition. I was embarrassed to ask her for so much money, but she told me that everything would be taken care of. I will always be appreciative to her for somehow organizing enough people to pay for my tuition at the culinary school of my dreams. To make the most of my time and the money being spent on me, I worked part-time as soon as I arrived in France. I put a lot of effort into my job and graduated as one of the best chefs. A few months after graduating, I even secured a position at a posh French restaurant. Slowly but surely, I paid back my aunt with half of my wages. I was fortunate to not be dependent on student loans, as I may not have been able to repay them in the future. I worked in France for a few years before saving enough money to return home and start my own restaurant. Here, I held the position of head chef at another restaurant while pursuing my dream of one day owning my own establishment. I was able to open the restaurant I had been working toward for so long once everything was settled a few weeks ago. I started the firm with two of my old friends from my time in France, and we are now co-owners. When they let me pick the restaurant's name, I was happy to accept. We were all cool with my starting the restaurant in my preferred city because they happened to be from the same state. It was a fortunate coincidence for us that I named it after my mother, whose name was both lovely and unusual in the city where we lived. At last, everything was starting to come together. Before we opened for business, we held a modest celebration a few days ago for a select few attendees. I invited my aunt and a couple of her friends who had helped with my tuition, of course. I invited a few of my school buddies as well, but that was all. For obvious reasons, my brother and father were not invited. I hadn't spoken to them since I left home, so even if I had wanted to, I couldn't have, nor had either of them both bothered to contact me. This worked out better for all of us, I suppose. But I should have known that eventually they would come along to capitalize on my success, and that's exactly what occurred. Since our last names were the same, security did not stop them when they arrived an hour before the party was scheduled to start. At least some of what they said about being there to surprise me was accurate. To be sure, I was taken aback when I saw them. I was received by my brother and father as if nothing bad had ever transpired between us. For what was possibly the first time in my life, they showed me warmth. When they walked inside the restaurant, I was startled and stopped. My friends left my family alone after observing that something wasn't quite right. I appreciate that they noticed how uncomfortable I was. They gave me another surprise while I was still reeling from the initial shock, a present. My father informed me that he had commissioned the portrait of my mother to be displayed in my restaurant. He knew it had to be me as soon as he learned that our city was getting a nice new restaurant named after her. He claimed to have known I had it in me all along. My brother also joined in, complimenting me and expressing his pride in me. I was astounded by what I heard. I was waiting for them to become serious because I sensed something was up with all of this. They had to have had a purpose for being there. They eventually got around to it. My brother was apparently now employed as a bartender. Only my dad's ability to persuade a friend to offer him a position at his club made this feasible. Throughout high school and college, my brother's grades had been declining, and he had failed to land the well-paying jobs that my dad had always anticipated. It was partly because of his laziness in high school football games that he was not awarded a sports scholarship. Paradoxically, he was the one who was turned down for admission everywhere else. Thus he ended up attending community college. Even though my brother had done nothing to merit it, they wanted me to make him a partner in the company so he could have a more prestigious position. I wanted to laugh in their faces, but refrained and assured them I would give it some thought. Naturally, I wasn't going to give it any thought. I just didn't want to reject them right away. I wanted them to remain for the celebration because I had another, better idea that would make my family seem bad since they had emerged from hiding when they learned of my accomplishment. They appeared happy, but they were unaware of what was going to unfold. As the evening wore on, visitors began to show up. Everyone I had invited got there in less than an hour. My brother and Dad went out and socialized, and so did I throughout the evening. Even worse, I heard them brag to a few others about me. Their brazen boldness amazed me. It was time for the hosts, my partners, and I to make a toast towards the end of the celebration. I wanted to reserve the best for last, so I let my pals go first. When it was finally my moment to talk, I was prepared to say everything on my mind. I began by toasting to my mother, who was the reason I'd been able to accomplish so much, and thanked each and every one of my visitors. I really think that my confidence that I could do anything in life came from her faith in me when I was a youngster, and that belief persisted in me even after she passed away. I paid my respects and then discussed the true purpose of my speech. I thanked my aunt and mentioned that I had to borrow money from her and her friends in order to go culinary school. Finally, I mentioned my family, which is the reason I had to take out a loan in the first place. I spoke about my upbringing and how my father, who was often criticizing me for having feminine hobbies like cooking, never showed me love or faith. I described how my father had refused to pay for my education because he was afraid I would outshine his golden child, my brother, who was a carbon copy of him. That was the reason I left home, but I overcame them all to become the person I am today. In a sense, therefore, they shouldered part of the blame for all the adversities I had encountered, or else I may never have discovered my resilience. While I was speaking, a number of people gave my brother and Dad the worst looks possible, but they had the grace to at least appear embarrassed, even though I knew they didn't feel that way. Following my speech, I went to embrace my brother and Dad and pretended to be just as they had been when they had arrived. That game is playable by two. I said that I had forgiven them for whatever had happened in the past, since they had come to celebrate my accomplishment. I went so far as to offer my brother the position of bartender at my eatery. Everyone else appeared to regard this as a sincere reconciliation, and when I finished speaking, they applauded. A couple wolves even had their whistles. All that was known to me and my family was that this was just an attempt, one that I had completed with much success, to make them feel inferior. Even though it was evident they wanted to storm out in anger, they were forced to pretend to be appreciative and smile instead of being furious. My brother and Dad confronted me outside the restaurant later, after the throng had dispersed and it was time to depart. They were enraged, and I believe my brother's eyes were filled with tears of rage. They insisted on an explanation, questioning why, if I had never planned to make my brother a partner, I hadn't just turned them away right away. I chuckled and informed them that this was my way of making up for all the wrongs they had done to me during the years. It was precisely what they deserved, I remarked. Even after hearing my brother sob and saying that this was the cruelest thing anybody had ever done to him, I turned to go and didn't bother to turn around. My father was furious too. I didn't care that he shouted after me, claiming I would regret doing this. I was in my car already, heading out of town. I last heard from them a few days ago, and since then, nothing. I disagree with my aunt, who believes I could have overreached and ought to have just ejected them right away. It was rightfully earned. ATA for making fun of my brother and father. First update. Despite what my aunt mentioned about me being overly harsh, I made the decision not to contact my family to apologize. I will not pretend to feel guilty for what I did. I don't. When they visited, they had the opportunity to apologize, but they chose not to. My aunt hasn't said anything about it since I told her about it, even though she still thinks I shouldn't have done what I did. We're going to have to agree to differ in this case, I suppose, and that's fine with me. In other news, my brother has been disparaging me in front of all of our former school pals behind my back. We attended the same high school, which is regrettable since now I'm getting odd texts from students confirming the allegations. He's telling everyone that I purposely fed them food that was 3 days old at my business, humiliating both him and my parents. It's hardly unexpected that he is embellishing the tale to paint himself as the victim. Small-scale rumors wouldn't normally concern me, but I don't want prospective clients to take these lies seriously. I contacted my brother, threatening to ensure he lost his current job as well if he continued to disseminate false information about me and my business. I sincerely don't have time to deal with pointless drama, so I'm hoping this works. This is the last thing I need when I'm working so hard. Second update. My brother responded to my SMS with a lol, stating he won't stop until I make him a partner. The degree of delusion in this case is beyond comprehension. Furthermore, isn't it absurd for him to be disparaging the restaurant he wants to join if his goal is to become a partner? This is probably just my dad's way of getting his darling son to take a high-profile job without really performing any effort. Regretfully, they cannot make it work with me. I threatened to have my attorneys contact him if he didn't stop. He's not in a position to bargain with me at this time. I haven't filed a lawsuit just yet since I don't want to become entangled in needless controversy. But if he attempts anything else, I'll move, guaranteed. This serves as his final caution. Third update. I haven't given an update in over a month. I've been so busy that I haven't had time to update you on the situation. Even if my brother had ceased disparaging me, they were still eager to benefit from my success. In an attempt to scare me, my brother and father visited my residence a few weeks ago. They said they had already spoken to a lawyer and threatened to sue me for naming my restaurant after my mother. They advised me to make my brother a partner if I wanted to avoid complications. As soon as I realized that no lawyer would take on such an absurd matter, I called their bluff. It appeared that they had forgotten that she was not just my dad's wife, but also my mother. I could use her name without breaking any laws. I warned them I would have to contact the police if they didn't leave me alone, since I had had enough of their crap at that point. Fortunately, my dad stopped my brother from grabbing me by the collar when he lost his cool. He appeared to have lost his temper due to the ongoing humiliation. Well, I wasn't at blame, and they were fortunate that I refrained from calling the police at that very moment. I ordered my dad to come out, but he said he wanted to talk to me alone and sent my brother to cool off in the car. My father attempted to control me after my brother passed away by claiming that my mother would be angry with me if she knew what I was doing. What he meant to say was bury the hatchet. I told him to go away because I could take it no more at this point. He was unable to control me by using my mother's recollections. Even for him, that was low. We had long since passed the moment of forgiveness. I couldn't understand why they expected me to forgive them without even asking, when none of them had ever shown regret to me. Regarding my mother's perception, I'm confident that she was disappointed when my father declined to cover my tuition. If he had made me feel bad about myself every time, she would have been just as upset. My father ought to be the last to lecture me on what my mother would or wouldn't approve of. No matter where she is, I know Mother is proud of me, and nothing my dad says will make it any different. At least business is well at my restaurant, and I intend to grow it shortly.
This story is titled, I Walked Out of My Family's Thanksgiving Dinner. and they haven't stopped calling. Hey everyone. Before we jump into today's video, I need your help. We've noticed the channel is losing some traction, and subscribing is one of the best ways you can support us. It's quick, free, and it helps us keep bringing you awesome content. Your support means the world. Let's keep this channel growing together. Thanks so much. Now let's start the video. Hey everyone, my name's Kyle, 28 male, and I've been sitting on this for a while. It's about my family, and honestly, I feel like I'm losing my mind trying to figure out if I'm in the wrong here. I really need an outside perspective because this has been weighing on me for too long. Okay, so let me lay this out. Thanksgiving at my mom's house has always been a ritual of chaos. Not the warm, fuzzy kind you see in movies where everyone laughs over burnt turkey, but the exhausting, why am I here again? Type. It was always the same. Like clockwork. I knew what I was walking into the second I parked my car out front. Mom's house looked the same as it always did. The peeling white paint and crooked shutters seemed like they were holding on to the 90s for dear life. But it wasn't about the house. It was the people inside. Walking in, I braced myself like a boxer stepping into the ring. The smell of turkey and pie hit me first, which was nice until Mom's voice cut through. She was already in the kitchen, yelling at Emily, my younger sister, for bringing apple pie instead of pumpkin. Emily looked like she was regretting every choice that led her to this moment. She was clutching the pie box like it was a shield. I said pumpkin, Emily! Does nobody listen to me anymore? Mom threw up her hands, turning back to whatever she was burning on the stove. Emily shrugged. It's what the store had. Excuses, excuses, Mom muttered, slamming a pot onto the counter. I thought about sneaking out before anyone noticed me, but it was too late. Dad, parked in his recliner, noticed me first. He was half watching the football game, yelling like the players on TV cared about his commentary. Well, look who decided to show up, he said, gruff as ever. Before I could respond, Jake, my older brother, spotted me. He was leaning against the counter with a soda in one hand and a smirk on his face. Kyle, the prodigal son returns, he said, spreading his arms like he was welcoming royalty. What happened? Did Google Maps finally show you how to get back here? Nice to see you too, Jake, I said, my voice flat as I set the pie I'd brought down on the table. Jake didn't let up. Still riding solo? No kids? Man, what's the plan, bro? Waiting for a miracle? I forced a laugh and ignored him, heading to the kitchen to say hi to Mom. She didn't even look up from the stove. You're late, she said, stirring something aggressively. Traffic, I lied, even though I'd sat in my car for 20 minutes outside, psyching myself up to go in. Dinner wasn't even ready yet, but it already felt like I'd been there for hours. Mom's house had this way of pulling you into its vortex. Every Thanksgiving felt like stepping into a time machine. Nothing changed. Not the mismatched furniture or the smell of old carpet, and definitely not the people. Dad was glued to the game. Jake, meanwhile, was doing his usual thing, acting like he owned the place. Jake was the golden child. Always had been. He was the one who stayed close to home, married young, and popped out kids like it was a hobby. Meanwhile, I moved out, got a decent job in another city, and apparently became the family disappointment in the process. Yo, Kyle, Jake called from the living room. You still at that desk job? How's the corporate hamster wheel treating you? It's fine, I said, keeping my tone neutral. Fine, he mimicked, snorting. Man, you used to have big dreams. What happened to that? Thought you were going to be some hotshot. I ignored him, pretending to be interested in the bowl of chips on the counter. It was easier than engaging. Emily finally joined me in the kitchen. Her shoulders slumped. Mom's losing it, she whispered, glancing over her shoulder. She's been losing it since we were kids, I muttered back, and Emily stifled a laugh. What's up with Jake? She asked. He's on one tonight? He's always on one, I said, rolling my eyes. You'd think being Mr. Perfect would keep him too busy to mess with me, but nope. Emily shrugged. Well, at least you don't live here. You don't have to deal with this all the time. She had a point. I only had to survive this circus a couple of times a year. She was still stuck in town, working 2 jobs and somehow managing to deal with Mom's constant nitpicking. Mom interrupted us by yelling, Emily, where's the gravy? Like the world was ending. Emily sighed and went to deal with it, leaving me alone again. I was wondering how long I'd have to stay before it was socially acceptable to leave. Jake's voice boomed from the living room again. Kyle, you gonna sit in there all night? Come be sociable, man. It's Thanksgiving. Translation. Come out here so I can mess with you in front of everyone. I took a deep breath and walked into the living room. Jake immediately patted the seat next to him on the couch like we were best buds. Come on, sit, he said, grinning. Tell us about your exciting life. I sat, but the grin on his face told me this wasn't going to end well. So, he started, leaning back and crossing his arms. Still no girlfriend, huh? Jake, Dad cut in, not even looking away from the game. Lay off him. Jake laughed. What? I'm just asking. We're all family here, right? No secrets. I clenched my fists, trying to keep calm. No, Jake, no girlfriend. Thanks for asking. Shocker, he said, his tone dripping with sarcasm. Maybe you're being too picky. Mom walked in, wiping her hands on a towel. Dinner's ready, she announced, cutting Jake off before he could say anything else. I stood up, thanking God, relieved for the excuse to escape, even if only for a few minutes. Dinner might have been a temporary reprieve, but I knew better than to think the worst was over. Jake wasn't done, not by a long shot, and deep down, I knew this wasn't just about him. It was the whole family dynamic, the unspoken roles we were all forced to play. Jake, the golden boy. Me, the black sheep. Emily, the overlooked middle child. Mom, the ringmaster. It was exhausting, but this was Thanksgiving at Mom's house. Same mess, different year. Sitting at the dinner table was like entering a battlefield, except the weapons were forks, knives, and relentless passive aggression. The spread looked impressive, sure. Mom's turkey centerpiece surrounded by other appetizers, but the atmosphere was as tense as the time Emily accidentally spilled sauce on Jake's wedding tux. Everyone sat in their usual spots, like it was assigned seating. Dad at the head of the table, commanding the room without saying much. Mom next to him, ready to swoop in with corrections or guilt trips. Jake took the seat across from me naturally, while Emily and I filled in the gaps. It was a setup that guaranteed plenty of opportunities for Jake to take shots at me, and he wasted no time getting started. So, Kyle, he began, his fork paused mid-air. Still eating like a bird? Or did you finally learn how to enjoy real food? I ignored him, reaching for the green beans. Looks great, Mom, I said, trying to steer the conversation elsewhere. Mom smiled faintly, but couldn't help chiming in. You could use a little more on your plate, Kyle. You're looking thin. Are you eating enough these days? I'm fine, I said, just trying to stay healthy. Jake chuckled. Healthy? You're practically wasting away. You know, some of us actually work out. Maybe you should try it sometime. Thanks for the advice, Jake, I said, not looking up. You're welcome, he said, grinning as if he'd done me a favor. Emily tried to shift the conversation. So, Jake, how are the kids doing? Oh, they're great, Jake said, puffing up with pride. Brandon just started soccer, and he's already the best on his team. He's got my genes, obviously. And Lily? Smart as a whip. Top of her class. That's great, Emily said, smiling politely. You must be proud. Of course, Jake said, glancing at me. But, you know, not everyone gets the whole parenting thing. Right, Kyle? I set my fork down and took a deep breath. Right, Jake, because you've clearly got it all figured out. Mom intervened, waving her fork like a referee. Boys, let's not argue, it's Thanksgiving. We're not arguing, Jake said innocently. Just making conversation. Emily shot me a look across the table, her eyes saying, just let it go. I nodded slightly, picking at my food. As dinner went on, the digs kept coming. Subtle and not so subtle. Jake brought up the time I flunked a math test in high school. Then the time I accidentally broke Dad's favorite coffee mug. It was like he had a mental archive of every mistake I'd ever made, ready to pull out at the worst moments. So, Kyle, Jake said, leaning back in his chair, what's it like living alone? Must be nice not having to answer to anyone, huh? No responsibilities, no stress, just you and your microwave dinners. I clenched my jaw but forced a smile. It's great, actually. I enjoy the peace and quiet. Oh, I bet, he said, laughing. You've always been more of a lone wolf, or, you know, just alone. Dad finally spoke up, his voice gruff. Jake, enough. Let the boy eat. Jake held up his hands in mock surrender. Just joking, Dad. Relax. Mom sighed, shaking her head. Jake, you should really be nicer to your brother. But even her tone lacked conviction. She wasn't defending me as much as she was trying to maintain some illusion of harmony. Jake knew it too, and he just grinned, taking another bite of turkey. Emily, bless her, tried again to steer the conversation. Mom, the stuffing's really good this year. Did you use a new recipe? Mom brightened a little. I did, actually. It's one I saw on TV last week. They used more dots. Oh, here we go, Jake interrupted, rolling his eyes. Mom's cooking tips. Kyle, you should take notes. Maybe you could learn how to make something that doesn't come in a box. I looked up, finally losing patience. What's your problem, Jake? Seriously. You've been on my case all night. The table went silent. Even Dad looked up from his plate, his expression unreadable. Jake, of course, just smirked. Relax, man, he said, like he's so innocent. I'm just having fun. Don't be so sensitive. That's your excuse every year, I shot back. It's not fun. It's just you being an ass. Kyle! Mom snapped, her eyes wide. Language! Oh, come on, Jake said, laughing. Don't get your feelings hurt, little bro. It's Thanksgiving. Lighten up. I stared at him, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Emily looked down at her plate, clearly wishing she were anywhere else. Maybe if you spent less time criticizing everyone else, I said quietly, you'd have something better to do. Jake's grin faltered, just for a second. Then he leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. You want to talk about better things to do? Like what? Sitting alone in your apartment every night, watching reruns and pretending you're happy? Jake, stop, Emily said, her voice firm. But Jake wasn't done. You act like you're above all this. Above us. But let's be real, Kyle. What have you done that's so great? What do you have to show for yourself? Enough! Dad barked, slamming his hand on the table. Both of you, sit down and shut up. The room went dead silent. Even Jake didn't dare say another word. I stared at my plate, my appetite long gone. Mom muttered something about dessert, standing to clear the dishes. I stayed quiet, my hands clenched under the table. Jake smirked again, but this time there was something in his eyes, like he knew he'd pushed too far, but couldn't admit it. The table may have been set with turkey and stuffing, but all I could taste was resentment. When the dinner was finally over, the night was far from done. We'd barely made it to the couch before Jake started in with his usual performance, Kyle's greatest hits, starring me as the punchline to every joke. It wasn't enough for him to ruin dinner. No, he had to keep the show rolling, and everyone else just played along like it was normal. Hey, remember when Kyle tried to fix the lawnmower and ended up flooding the garage? Jake said, laughing so hard he nearly spilled his drink. What was the plan there, bro? Drown the engine? Mom chimed in before I could respond. Oh, that was a disaster. Kyle, you've always been so clumsy. I told you to call your father, but no, you had to do it yourself. It was one time, I said, my voice sharp. And I was 16. Jake grinned, leaning back on the couch like he'd just won an award. 16? Doesn't matter, man. You've been screwing up since day one. Emily, sitting on the armchair, piped up, Jake, come on. You don't have to keep dragging him. Jake turned to her. Dragging him? Please. Kyle's fine. He knows I'm joking. Right, little bro? I ignored him, focusing on the TV. A rerun of some old sitcom was playing, but I couldn't hear a word over the sound of Jake's voice. Mom walked in from the kitchen, carrying a tray of coffee and dessert. All right, everyone. Pie time. Let's try to be civil, please. Civil, Jake said, raising an eyebrow. I'm always civil. It's Kyle who can't take a joke. Don't blame this on me, I yelled, finally looking at him. You've been a jerk all night, and everyone just lets you get away with it. Oh, poor Kyle, Jake said, mockingly wiping an invisible tear from his eye. Always the victim. Boo-hoo. Maybe if you didn't make it so easy, I wouldn't have so much material. Jake, Mom said, her tone sharp. That's enough. But Jake wasn't done. He never was. What? I'm just saying what everyone's thinking. Look, Mom, you're the one who's always cleaning up after him. How many times did you have to call his landlord to bail him out? And let's not forget college. 2 semesters and out. Real impressive. Jake, seriously. Shut up, Emily said, her voice louder now. Oh, don't start, Emily, Jake shot back. You're no saint either. You're 28 and still living in Mom's basement. You're just mad I'm saying out loud what we're all thinking. I'm not living in the basement, Emily yelled, her face red. It's temporary, and you know it. Yeah, sure, Jake said, rolling his eyes. Temporary. Like how Kyle's career is taking off. I stood up, my fists clenched. You've got a lot to say for someone whose entire life revolves around putting other people down. What's your deal, Jake? Are you that insecure, or do you just get off on being an asshole? Jake's grin disappeared. Watch it, Kyle. Don't start something you can't finish. Oh, don't worry, I said, stepping closer. I can finish it just fine. Dad, who had been silent for most of the evening, finally spoke up. Both of you, sit your asses down. I'm sick of hearing this crap. Why don't you say something to him for once? I snapped, pointing at Jake. He's the one causing problems. But you all just sit there and let him. Don't drag me into your bullshit, Dad said, glaring at me. You're both acting like kids. Jake laughed bitterly. See? Even Dad agrees. You're the problem, Kyle. You know what? I said, my voice rising. Screw this. Screw you. And screw this whole family dynamic where Jake gets to act like a king, and the rest of us are just supposed to take it. Mom gasped. Kyle, how dare you talk like that? How dare I? I shot back. How dare you let this happen year after year? You enable him, you all do, and I'm done with it. The room went silent. Even Emily looked like she wanted to disappear into the couch. Jake just sat there, smirking like he'd won. But for the first time, I didn't care. You know what, Jake? I said, my voice steady now. You're not better than anyone here. You're just loud. That's it. And one day, when your kids grow up and start resenting you the way we all resent you, maybe you'll figure it out. But until then, go to hell. I grabbed my coat and headed for the door. Mom yelled after me, Kyle, you're not leaving like this. Watch me, I said, slamming the door behind me. I sat in my car for a minute, my hands shaking. My phone buzzed in my pocket, probably Mom or Emily trying to convince me to come back. I didn't even check. For the first time, I felt like I'd finally said what needed to be said. Jake could sit in his little throne all he wanted. I wasn't going to be his punching bag anymore. But as I sat there, something didn't feel right. Something else was nagging at me, a sense that the night wasn't over. Not yet. Just before I turned on the car, the door to the house burst open, and Jake came stomping out, his face twisted in anger. He didn't even bother with a coat, just marched across the driveway toward my car. I rolled down the window halfway, more out of instinct than anything else. What the hell is your problem? He yelled, his breath visible in the freezing air. My problem? I shot back. You're the one who's been pushing buttons all night. Oh, don't start that crap again, he said, slamming his hand on the roof of my car. You think you can just walk out like that? Throw your little tantrum and leave the rest of us to clean up the mess? Mess? I said, laughing bitterly. The only mess here is you, Jake. You've been a self-centered prick your entire life, and everyone just lets you get away with it. Jake's eyes narrowed, and for a second, I thought he might actually punch me. You're a real piece of work, you know that, acting like you're so much better than the rest of us. Well, guess what, Kyle? You're a joke, always have been. Better a joke than a bully, I snapped, opening the car door and stepping out. My pulse was pounding in my ears, but I wasn't about to back down. We stood there in the driveway, the tension between us so thick. Jake towered over me, his fists clenched at his sides. I wasn't sure if he was going to swing or just keep running his mouth, but either way, I wasn't backing down. Go back inside, Jake, I said, my voice low and steady. Go back to your perfect little life and leave me the hell alone. Or what? He said, stepping closer. You gonna hit me? Go ahead, Kyle. Show everyone what a tough guy you are. I didn't move. My hands were at my sides, trembling with anger, but I kept them there. I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction. Pathetic, Jake spat, shaking his head. You can't even stand up for yourself. No wonder nobody respects you. That was it. I didn't even think. My hand shot out, shoving him hard in the chest. He stumbled back a step, his eyes widening in surprise. What the hell, man? He said, regaining his balance. You don't get to talk to me like that anymore, I said, my voice shaking. I'm done, Jake. Done with your crap. Done with this family. Done with all of it. Jake's face twisted into a snarl. You think walking away makes you better than me? You're just a coward. Always have been. Always will be. I'd rather be a coward than a bully, I shot back. At least I don't need to tear other people down to feel good about myself. The sound of the door opening interrupted us. Emily stepped outside, her face pale. Guys, stop it, she said. Just stop. This is insane. Stay out of this, Emily, Jake snapped, not even looking at her. No, I won't stay out of it, she said, stepping between us. You're acting like a maniac, Jake. And Kyle, you're not helping. Both of you need to grow up. I took a step back. I'm not the one who started this. And I'm not the one running away, Jake shot back. Emily looked at me, her eyes pleading. Kyle, please, just come back inside. Let's figure this out. I shook my head. There's nothing to figure out, Emily. Jake's made it pretty clear how he feels about me. And honestly, I don't care anymore. She looked like she wanted to say something else, but Jake cut her off. Good, go. Nobody's stopping you. Emily yelled, startling both of us. For once in your life, Jake, shut up. The three of us stood there in the freezing driveway, the weight of years of resentment and unspoken anger hanging between us. I glanced back at the house, half expecting Mom or Dad to come out, but the door stayed closed. They weren't going to intervene. They never did. Jake finally broke the silence. You walk away now, Kyle, and don't bother coming back. You're not part of this family anymore. Good, I said, turning toward my car. Because I don't want to be. I got in and slammed the door. I didn't look back as I drove away. But as the house disappeared in my rearview mirror, a pit formed in my stomach. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Something was coming. I could feel it. The drive home felt like a blur. My mind was spinning, replaying every word Jake said, every smug look, every insult. I should have felt free, finally cutting ties with the toxicity, but instead, something kept gnawing at me, a mix of anger, guilt, and something I couldn't quite name. Halfway back to my apartment, my phone buzzed again. I pulled over onto the shoulder and grabbed it. A text from Emily lit up the screen. Emily, you need to come back. Something's wrong. Please. My chest tightened. Something about those two words, something's wrong, made anxious. Emily wasn't the type to exaggerate. If she was texting me like this, it had to be serious. I sat there for a moment, gripping the phone as the cold air seeped in through the cracked window. My better judgment screamed at me to keep driving, to leave all the dysfunction behind, but Emily's words stayed with me. I sighed, shoved the car into gear, and turned around. The house looked different when I pulled back into the driveway. The warm glow that had mocked me earlier now felt eerie, like it didn't belong. As I stepped out of the car, I felt something wasn't right. The front door was slightly ajar, swinging gently in the wind. I hesitated. The living room was empty. The plates from dinner were still on the table, the remnants of dessert untouched. The laughter and chaos from earlier were gone, replaced by a heavy silence. My heart pounded in my chest as I called out, Emily? Dad? No answer. I moved through the house, my footsteps loud against the hardwood floor. The kitchen was dark. The only light coming from the refrigerator door left ajar. A faint hum filled the room, but it wasn't enough to drown out the uneasy quiet. That's when I heard it. A muffled thud from the back of the house. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. For a moment, I thought about turning around and leaving, but then I remembered Emily's text. If she needed me, I wasn't going to abandon her. Not again. The hallway felt longer than it should have. I reached the door to Dad's study where the noise had come from. The door was slightly open, and the dim light spilling out cast strange shadows on the walls. I pushed it open slowly. Inside, Jake was standing by the desk, his back to me. He was holding something. A photo frame? His shoulders were tense, his head bowed. For a moment, I thought he was crying, but then he turned around, and I saw his face. It wasn't sadness, it was rage. You came back, he said, his voice low and gravelly. Of course you did. You couldn't just leave it alone. What are you talking about? I asked, my voice shaky. Where's Emily? Where's Mom and Dad? Jake laughed, but it was hollow, humorless. He slammed the photo frame down on the desk, shattering the glass. They're gone. Just us now. What the hell are you talking about? I said, taking a step back. Gone where? Jake didn't answer. Instead, he stepped closer, his fists clenched. You always thought you were better than me, didn't you? Mr. Perfect. Always the victim. Poor little Kyle. I never thought that, I said, my voice trembling. Jake, where are they? You're the reason this family's broken, he snarled, his voice rising. You, with your holier-than-thou attitude, your constant running away. You're the one who doesn't belong. Jake was unhinged. This wasn't the brother I grew up with, the one who loved teasing, but never crossed the line into outright madness. Something had snapped in him, and I didn't know how to fix it. Suddenly, a noise from upstairs broke the tension. Jake's head whipped around, his expression shifting from rage to something darker. Without thinking, I bolted for the stairs, pushing past him as he yelled after me. Don't you dare go up there, Kyle! I didn't listen. My legs carried me up 2 steps at a time, my heart pounding in my ears. I could see light spilling out from under one of the bedroom doors. I ran toward it, throwing the door open. Inside, Emily was sitting on the floor, her back against the bed. She looked up at me, her face pale and her eyes wide with fear. Kyle, she whispered. He's lost it. What happened? I asked, kneeling beside her. Before she could answer, Jake's voice boomed from the hallway. Get out of there, Kyle, now! I stood up, positioning myself between Emily and the door as Jake appeared in the doorway, his face twisted with fury. She texted you, didn't she? He spat. She had to drag you back here to play the hero. You always need to be the hero. Jake, stop, I said, my voice firm. Whatever's going on, we can fix it. Just calm down. There's nothing to fix, he screamed, stepping into the room. This family's broken, Kyle. It's been broken for years, and it's your fault. You and Emily, always ganging up on me, always making me the bad guy. Nobody made you the bad guy, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. You did that all on your own. Jake lunged at me, but I was ready this time. I sidestepped him, grabbing Emily's arm and pulling her to her feet. Get out, I whispered, and she didn't hesitate. I saw Mom and Dad in the corner of the room. They weren't yelling. They weren't rushing to pull us apart. They just stood there, frozen, like spectators at a train wreck. Do something, Emily screamed. He's losing it. But Mom just shook her head, her hands fluttering uselessly, like she couldn't decide whether to intervene or walk away. Dad stood stiffly by her side, his arms crossed, his jaw tight. He didn't say a word. Mom! Dad! Help him! Emily shouted again, but neither moved. Finally, Mom muttered, They're brothers, Emily. They'll sort it out. Sort it out? I had shouted, stepping back from Jake. Are you serious right now? He's out of control and you're just standing there? Stop yelling at your mother, Dad said finally, his voice low and sharp, like a reprimand to a child. The front door was in sight when Jake caught up, grabbing my arm and yanking me back. I turned, swinging wildly, and my fist connected with his jaw. He stumbled back, more surprised than hurt, and I used the moment to shove Emily toward the door. Go! I shouted. Now! She hesitated for a split second before nodding and running outside. Jake recovered quickly, his face a mask of fury as he came at me again. But this time I was ready. The fight was raw, messy, and desperate. Two brothers finally tearing into years of resentment and rage. But in the end, it wasn't about winning. It was about surviving. And as I stood there, breathing hard, Jake slumped against the wall, glaring at me with hatred in his eyes. For the first time, I saw him for what he really was. A man broken by his own bitterness, lashing out at the world because he didn't know how to fix himself. I'm done, Jake, I said, my voice quiet but firm. You can't hurt me anymore. Without another word, I turned and walked out the door. Emily and I went to a diner. We slid into a corner booth, the faint smell of coffee lingering in the air. I don't think I can go back there, she said softly, her voice trembling. You shouldn't, I replied. You don't owe them anything. They're still Mom and Dad, she whispered, her hands shaking around her coffee cup. No, I said firmly. Parents protect their kids. They don't make excuses for abuse or stand by while it happens. Her eyes filled with doubt. What do we do now? We cut them out, I said, taking a steady sip of coffee. Completely. It's the only way. Later that night, I blocked Jake, then Dad, then Mom. The weight of their toxicity lifted, replaced by a strange calm. Cutting ties wasn't easy, but it was the first step toward freedom. And for the first time, I felt like I could finally move forward. I don't know what you guys may think, but this is it for me. I'm done with their nonsense.
Hey there, I'm Valerie and I'm 50 years old. Buckle up, because this tale spans a few years, but trust me, it's worth it. My daughter and I are now in a much better place than we ever imagined. It all began when I met Ted, my husband, through some friends we had in common. We went on a couple of dates and pretty quickly fell in love. We dated for around 3 years before we got married. I was ecstatic that I got to marry him because he was genuinely like the other half of me. We completed each other in a way that I can't explain. After a year of marriage, Ted began asking me to start trying for a baby. Now at that time, I was very much scared of giving birth. Plus, I had a lot of complications with my reproductive health, and I didn't want to jeopardize either mine or the future baby's life. But Ted was persistent, so I eventually gave in. My entire pregnancy was a trying time because of my many complications. Pregnancy became a huge pain, but Ted was very patient and caring in the first 3 months until he began frequently traveling for work. It only got harder from then on, but Ted did make it in time for the birth of our daughter Kendall. Ted and I lived in a pretty big, cozy apartment that was rented. We had no plans to move because we knew that we weren't stable enough to buy a house. When I was around 7 months pregnant, we had a new neighbor move into the apartment next to ours. Even though Ted was very hesitant and against us going to meet her, I felt like both of us being pregnant would lead to some connection, so I dragged Ted over to her apartment door and rang the bell. "Hello, I'm Valerie, and this is my husband, Ted. We're your neighbors, and we just wanted to introduce ourselves. It's lovely to meet you guys. My name's Cassie. Why don't you come on in? I'm sorry if this is weird, but I just thought that it would be lovely to have another companion who's also pregnant like me. Ted has been really busy with work trips, and I could use the company. Tell me about it. I was about to come over later on this evening anyway because I could use the help too. Where's your husband? Oh, I don't have one. The man who got me pregnant ended up abandoning me, so I had to raise this little one all by myself. Oh, you poor thing. We're always right across from you if you ever need anything, okay? Even if I may not come to help you out, Ted will be right there. Yeah. At that time, I did think it was pretty odd that Ted seemed so uncomfortable with Cassie. I mean, what reason did he have to be uncomfortable? I had pretty much desensitized him to the gross parts of pregnancy, and there was no way he would have to witness Cassie in that light. Not to mention, at best, he'd only have to run small errands for her. I tried to ask him about why he looked so uncomfortable that day, but he told me to just forget about it and that he was tired. I let it go because I saw no reason to ask him any more. Although if I had pressed further at that point, I would have probably saved my daughter and me a lot of pain. Anyway, Cassie and I spent a lot of time together and bonded over our pregnancies. Ted seemed very uncomfortable with the whole thing but refused to tell me why. He would just tell me it was weird that I randomly became friends with a stranger. But isn't that how people make friends? After I gave birth to my daughter Kendall, life became even fuller. Ted and I got really busy with adjusting to our new routines, but we also kept Cassie in mind. I mean, I barely managed to get through my pregnancy, and I had Ted's help. I couldn't imagine what it must have been like for Cassie. Anyway, 3 months after I gave birth, Cassie did too, and she had a baby girl named May. Since we lived so close together and our kids were so close in age, the two of them grew up really close. We would have a bunch of play dates for our girls, which I have to admit, we also used as downtime for us. Overall, we had a pretty picturesque life. As the years passed, the girls grew older and began to find comfort in each other's homes. That was until they were in their first year of high school. May suddenly stopped coming over, and Kendall refused to see her. Of course, as any mother would be, I was very concerned. At first, I thought it was just a silly little fight that both of them had and were refusing to mend things. But then months passed, and the animosity between them only grew worse. So I sat down with Kendall one night and asked her what had happened. "Honey, I know you don't want to talk about it, but could you please tell me what went down between you and May?" "Mom, I don't want to talk about it." "I know, but you guys used to be such good friends. Hell, you grew up together. What happened?" "Look, I wish I had the answer to." "Okay." "Huh. What do you mean?" "I don't know, Mom. We had our summer break, and when high school started, May just started ignoring me. She refused to talk to me and even began to poke fun at me with her friends." "What? Why would she do that?" "I have no idea. I tried to talk to her many times, but she would either look at me with disgust or she would mock me and make fun of me." "Oh, honey, that's horrible. Do you want me to speak to Cass?" "No, please don't. It will probably make things worse for me in school." All right. My mouth sealed. "But if May ever does anything too bad, you need to promise me that you'll come tell me about it." "I promise." Curiosity was annoying at me. I wanted to know why May started behaving that way so badly, but I had no way of doing it besides. I did note that Cassie never approached me about the girls not hanging out anymore. In fact, she barely ever spoke to me. I realized that I never made the attempt to talk to her either, so I tried to change that, but Cassie would always be too busy to talk. Sometimes May would answer the door whenever I went over, and she would look me over with disgust, and I immediately understood how Kendall must have been feeling. I tried to talk to her too, but she would just walk away from the door and call for Cassie. Eventually, we just didn't speak that much. Life carried on as if normal. In my daughter's final year of high school, I began planning out our finances to support Kendall. I didn't want her burdened by any student loans because I knew firsthand just how long it took to clear them off. Not to mention, with the economy that we were in, she would have taken even longer. The stress of having to repay a loan was not something I wanted her to ever feel. That was why Ted and I planned way ahead and began saving a year before Kendall was born. We only wanted the best for her. She knew about this savings account we had for her, and she knew just how much was in it. There was enough money in it to allow her to go to an Ivy League and still have some left over for her to use however she wanted. Kendall and I were shortlisting colleges one day when I decided to have a look at the savings account we had for her. It just always brought me joy to see how we had ensured a good life for her. But when I saw the account, my heart dropped. Over 2/3 of the amount was gone from it. I tried my best not to freak out in front of Kendall, but I did ask her to go to her room because I had some things to take care of. When she left, I began fully losing my mind. Where could so much money have gone? I looked at the transaction history and saw that it had been withdrawn at an ATM. There was only one person other than me who had access to this account, and that was Ted. I didn't know why he would possibly have needed to withdraw so much money from her account, but I remember just praying really hard that he had not used it up already. I spent the rest of my day an anxious mess as I waited for Ted to come back home from work. Anyway, when Ted finally came back home, he avoided me. Dinner was awkward, and Kendall even asked me if something was wrong with Ted. I assured her that he was just tired and told her to go back to her room. When I walked into mine and Ted's rooms, he was scrolling through social media on his phone. I decided that now he could not ignore me, so he had to tell me what was going on. "Okay, so you've been avoiding me, which means that you know what I want to talk about." "I actually have no idea, and I haven't been avoiding you. I've just had a tiring day and I want to sleep." "You can sleep in a bit, but since you don't know what I want to talk about, then let me enlighten you." "Can we please not do this?" "We have to because Kendall's future depends on it." I was looking at her savings account today and noticed that a large portion of it got withdrawn from an ATM. The only other person who knows the bank details is you. What did you do with the money, and why did you take it out? I really don't want to talk about this. You have no way of getting out of this. If you're in some serious debt or something, you need to tell me. No, it's nothing like that. I just needed to do something out of the goodness of my heart. Goodness of your heart? You can do those things out of your own pocket. You don't steal from your daughter for that. I didn't steal from her. The money is ours until she turns 18. I also contributed to it, so I get to withdraw from it. Kendall turns 18 in 2 months. Do you even know how happy she's been because she was thinking that she could go to Harvard to study law? How could you jeopardize? When you say goodness of your heart, are you talking about Cassie and May? Yes, they were struggling. I wanted to help them out, so I decided to give them our daughter's money. You could have asked me. We could have helped them out separately, and while it may not have been this big of an amount, some help is better than nothing. Look, May wanted to go to a really good university that even we had no way of contributing to. I happened to meet Cassie the day before yesterday, and she was crying about how she was struggling to tell May that she wouldn't be able to get what she wanted. I just felt bad, so I gave her the amount of money she wanted. Valerie, what about Kendall? What are we going to tell her? She's known for years the amount of money we saved up for her. She's worked hard and studied her bus off for years just so she could go to an Ivy League. What are we going to do about that? Kendall's a smart kid. I'm sure she'll get a scholarship. At that point, I did not want to see his face. I was so filled with anger and resentment against him. I couldn't believe that he would have done something so cruel to his own daughter. I mean, yeah, I felt bad for Maeve and Cassie, but Cassie also had the responsibility of telling her daughter their reality. It felt almost predatory, like she purposefully cried in front of Ted about her problem because she knew that Ted would do anything he could to make her feel better. I slept in the guest bedroom that night. I had a very fitful sleep, but somehow I managed to sleep. I woke up the next morning and Ted had gone to work. I decided that I should try and get the money back from Cassie. I waited until Kendall had gone off to school to go over to Cassie's place. "Hey, Val, sorry, I'm in a bit of a hurry right now. I need to get to work." "Oh, it's okay. I just needed to ask you something pretty small." "All right, what is it?" "Ted lent you some money the other day, and I just wanted to ask you if you could give it back. That was a huge amount from Kendall's university savings that we had started for her before she was even conceived. Ted took it without informing me." "What?" "Oh, no, I'm so sorry that Ted did that to you. I would never have taken the money if I knew that it was Kendall." "Yeah, so could you return it?" "I really, really wish I could, but since Ted gave me the money, it's mine now. Not to mention, I've already used a sizable portion of it to get Maeve into her dream college." "Well, just give me what's left then." "No, like I said, that money is mine now." "I'm sorry that something this horrible has happened to you, but I can't give you the money back now. If you'll excuse me, I'm running late." I was shocked at the way that Cassie was treating me, especially after the fact that we had been living next to each other for so long that we were practically family. I never thought that she'd have such an ugly side to her. I wanted to scream and rip my hair out in my anger and frustration. I went back into the house and finally made myself some breakfast. As I ate, I contemplated all the options that Kendall had. The money left in Kendall's savings account was enough to get her through community college at worst, maybe 1.5 years through a good university. I figured that the least that Ted could do, since he gave away almost the entirety of Kendall's savings, he could stop paying for her college. He had quite a few assets that he could sell to pay off her education without letting her fall into debt. I felt like that was the least he could do to make it up to Kendall, because I knew that she wasn't going to take the news well. That evening I broke the news to Kendall, and she was furious. She cried a lot, and I cried with her too. I couldn't imagine how she had been feeling, but I also knew that I shared a portion of that feeling. Kendall acknowledged that I had nothing to do with it and told me that she was in no way mad at me, just her dad. When Ted came home that evening, she went to her room and locked herself in there. Ted didn't even question where she was, and I assumed that was because he figured that I told her about what had happened. In fact, he barely even looked at me, which was good because I wanted the guilt of his actions to consume him wholly. But I knew I also needed to establish our plan for Kendall going forward. "So what are we doing for Kendall from here on?" "What do you mean?" "I thought we established that she'd get into college with a scholarship. Even so, we need to have some backup plan in case that doesn't pan out." "It will. There's no need to worry. I've seen kids with half her wit get full rides. It'll be a piece of cake for her." "That's very wishful thinking, Ted. There's no way we can rely on that. I've come up with a plan for you to pay for college." "Me?" "Well, both of us, but you have to put in more because you were the one who gave away her money. And since you believe that you contributed that much, I think it's only fair for you to pay that much more than me for Kendall's tuition." "Hell no. I'm not doing any of that. Kendall can either get a full ride or she can take a loan and work it off like everyone else. How are you more sympathetic to two people who have become strangers to us than to your own family? What is wrong with you?" "Look, I don't care what you say, but I'm not paying a penny for Kendall's college. She can use what's left, and you can help her if you want. In my opinion, she should apply for all the scholarships she can. That's it. Good night." I was beyond upset and frustrated at the way Ted was behaving. How could he put someone else's daughter over ours? What was it that made us less important to him? I cried myself to sleep that night, and over that week I kept asking Ted to reach a compromise and provide for his daughter in some way, at least. But he refused to budge. He even got his mother involved in it. If there's one thing you should know about Alia, It's that she absolutely hates my guts. She can't stand me, and she makes it known in every way possible, from insulting me to downright physically hurting me by accident. Alia loved to go against everything I said and did, even if I was the right one in the situation. So with Alia on his side, Ted saw no reason to give in to my demands. Kendall completely stopped talking to Ted and Alia. She refused to even acknowledge them, and neither of them had a problem with that. The both of us worked hard together to get her into a good college, and as luck would have it, she did end up getting a pretty good scholarship at an Ivy League. The scholarship covered about 75% of her tuition, and I could easily cover the rest for her. She would only need to work to support herself, which she was more than happy to do. Kendall always had a big passion for law, and that was what she did for the next 5 years. She rarely came home. Instead, I flew over to visit her. Life at home was unbearable, to say the least. Alia moved in with us and constantly tormented me. Ted and I stopped talking and lived like we were roommates. It was only a matter of time before one of us initiated a divorce. I stayed because I knew that getting a divorce would severely dent my finances, and Kendall had dealt with enough issues regarding finances. After Kendall graduated from college, she got herself a good job and started to finally settle down. That was when I initiated the divorce filing. But before I handed Ted the papers, I wanted to save up a good amount of money so I had something to fall back on. And that was it. I took another 2 years to get out. Just a few days before I was going to hand Ted our divorce papers, Kendall suddenly showed up at our house. I was surprised, but also really happy to see her. She greeted me with a big hug and told me she had some big news to share and that she was going to get her money back. I asked her what she meant, and she just asked me to call Ted and Alia downstairs. "Oh, hi, Kendall. What are you doing here?" "Hi, Dad. Well, nothing much, actually, except I happened to find something really interesting. You're a disgusting lawyer. Why have you brought your filth into this house?" "I would shut my mouth if I were you, Grandma. There is no way to speak to your grandmother." "Whatever. You guys died to me the day you stole my money." "Dad, your dad did not steal anything from you. He only helped a struggling child. But of course, you and your mother can't seem to see what goodness really is, right? Would you call supporting your affair child over your actual child goodness? Affair child? What on earth are you talking about? Kendall, what I'm talking about is that I have 2 DNA test reports stating that Maeve is your child, Dad." "What? What are you saying?" "Those are fake." "I knew you'd say that. That's why I got 2 tests from 2 different, very acclaimed places. How did you manage to find that out?" "Well, Mom and I got in contact after I graduated, and after we went drinking, she confessed everything to me. She felt horrible about how she dealt with it, so she made it up to me by agreeing to do a DNA test. I can explain, Valerie. I met a woman when I went on my first business trip when you were pregnant, and after drinking a bit too much, we slept together, and then it sort of became a habitual thing. She got pregnant and decided to move in next to us. I had no choice." "No, you had a choice and you made it. I was going to do this later, but here are the divorce papers. You deserve nothing." "I fully agree with Mom, which is why I'm suing you, Dad, for stealing my college fund." "See you in court." I couldn't believe what my life had come to. So that was why Ted had always been so uncomfortable around Cassie and Maeve. Were all the business trips he took after Kendall was born just an excuse to live next door and raise his second family? How filthy of a man was he to go and sleep with someone else when his wife was struggling with her pregnancy back home? I was filled with pure rage, but I was also relieved that Kendall was taking proper action against Ted's misdeeds. In the trial that happened after, Mae herself testified to Ted's involvement in her childhood and all the lies that he had spewed to keep her a secret. Apparently, he had given Kendall's money to Cassie because she threatened to out his secret to us if he didn't. She also told him that if she found out that he paid for Kendall's college, she would out him. She was jealous that my daughter was doing way better than hers, and this was her solution. The judge ruled in Kendall's favor, and Ted was ordered to pay her back and also pay back any loan that she may have taken to fund her education. Kendall and Ted worked out a payment amendment and deadline, and that was that. Kendall also helped me find another job closer to her and helped me move in. Ted signed the divorce papers without a fuss and in just a few short days, so much changed, but all of it was for the better. I am now in a much happier place, and I'm overjoyed to see my daughter thriving and accomplishing more than I could have ever imagined.